Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of different games coming up this upcoming weekend. Definitely a couple of huge ones and a couple of games in the SEC that going to be a little bit sketchy. Texas taking on Kentucky. We also have Alabama going to Oklahoma. A couple of games that could totally switch up the conference race and the CFP race in a lot of different ways. But let's get into a little bit of a hot take Thursday. I'll break down a couple of the CFP takes I have for you, and a couple of them are going to be a little bit upsetting for some of the other fans out there, but at the end of the day, I got to be able to speak my truth, got to be able to say what I think, and I think for this first one, I'm going to get a lot of love. I'll be totally honest with you. We got to change the selection committee. And first of all, this is not an attack on those people or the work that they do. I do believe that they do the best they can. I do believe that they are very good people. I do believe that they are trying to do their best. That being said, we have to get other people in there, very respectfully. Now, there are very qualified individuals. There are players, there are former players, there are former coaches, there are reporters in there. There are not nearly enough of them. 9 of the 13 people are ADs at a certain university. And not to say that ADs don't know enough about football, but to say ADs don't necessarily have the emphasis on football that I would like them to have if they're going to decide who is playing for a national title. Plain and simple. I really do think that this should be fully comprised of former coaches, former players mainly, those two groups, and then you have a couple of media personalities. I really do think that's the best way to go about it. People will argue tooth and nail of who the media personalities should be, who the biases of those media personalities are. Will Nick Saban put on for Alabama? All of these different things absolutely will come up in the conversation. I'm not arguing that. But I would argue it would happen even more when you're talking about an AD or when you're talking about someone that might not have the inside knowledge of a football program, of a football team, where a Nick Saban would, or where maybe a Joel Klatt would, or maybe a couple of these other guys, Danny Cannell, a couple of these other guys absolutely would. So you're going to have a battle one way or the other. You are going to have biases in that room. That is absolutely unavoidable because this is college football. This is sports. People are going to have biases when they walk in that room. I personally believe that former coaches, that former players will actually have less biases because they will understand what the football is being played in front of them. They will be able to discern which is the better team, which is the most deserving team, all of that type of stuff because they've lived all of those scenarios. They haven't necessarily seen them play out in front of them. They have literally been inside of those scenarios. So that's kind of the big difference to me. It's not to say that ADs don't do their best work or don't try their best or are downright bad at this. Is just to say we have to have people that have been on the field, that have felt those moments, that know what it's like to do what Oregon did last week, to play 8 straight games and go on the road and beat a team like Wisconsin, that knows how hard it is to do some of the things like play a full SEC schedule, that knows how hard it is to play a lot of these different really, really tough out-of-conference games. All of that stuff has to be taken into account, and not to say ADs don't do it, I just don't think they can do it to a degree that all of these other people can, that all of these other players, coaches, even media members can to a certain degree. So obviously, you are going to have biases in that room. The good news about having different media members in there is you can pluck someone from Fox, you can pluck someone from ESPN, you can pluck someone from CBS, and you would hypothetically you would have different biases in that room. A lot of people say ESPN is biased toward the SEC. They definitely are. And that obviously will lend itself to them kind of pushing that narrative. On Fox side, they'd rather have a couple of Big Ten teams in there. That would help them out in the next year when they come to the media rights deal. So they would want a little bit more Big Ten involved. And for CBS, it's a little bit of a mix. They want a little bit more Big Ten, a little bit more Big 12. It would be you kind of playing around with different stuff. And you'd obviously have to play around with this group and definitely not make sure that not the wrong people are in there. But let's be totally honest. Are we all okay with a ton of ADs just making the decision of who are the best football teams in the country? Are we all cool with 9 of the 13 people not having played football their entire lives or coached football their entire lives deciding who gets to play for the most prestigious trophy in our entire sport? That's the issue that I have. So whether it's Nick Saban or Reese Davis or Kirk Herbstreit or Joel Klatt or Josh Pate or whoever you want it to be, I'm more than happy to litigate that throughout the offseason. We have to have a different group. We just do. We have to have former players in there. We have to have former coaches in there. We could argue about the media personalities a little bit. I'd be more than happy to go back on that just a little bit as long as the former coaches and players were involved. But at the end of the day, we are not selecting the best teams in the country with the right people. We're just not. So we have to find a way to get a right selection committee in there. Much respect for the work that those people do. But as of right now, we are not seeing this play out the way that we want it to. I don't think any of us are. we have to get new people in there. We have to get a totally new system for that selection committee in there. I wouldn't necessarily love going purely to a formula. I kicked around that idea a little bit, but I do think there has to be some human element in this with a sport that is so much human element. I do think we have to add that in, but I do think we have to have just more qualified people in that room. Again, not trying to disrespect the committee, but a little bit trying to disrespect the committee. But moving forward, get rid of the auto buy system. I didn't understand it when it was brought up initially. I understand why it was agreed to by all the different people because you wanted to get this thing over the finish line. But let's just be totally honest. The number 12 team in the country is getting a bye and Ohio State isn't. That's insane. It just is. I love Boise State, and I think they're a very good team. And with this format, they do technically deserve to be a top 4 team to be getting that bye. I just think the auto buy system is ridiculous. I think the idea that you win a conference that might not be quite as tough as this other conference over here, you're automatically in. And I understand that they should be in the field. I'm not mad at the auto bid system. I think it's more than fine to put the Big 12 champion, more than fine to put the ACC champion, and more than fine to put the Group of 5 team in that field. I don't think it's really fair to automatically say, well, you're a top 4 conference champion, congratulations, you're a 4 seed, you get a bye, because Boise State, respectfully, probably would not make it out of the first weekend if they don't get that bye. Maybe that Big 12 champion probably would not make it out of the first weekend if they did not get that bye. And now you're looking at a situation where the 5 seed is where a lot of these teams want to be. Ohio State right now would be set up to play a BYU team that they'd be favored by 3 touchdowns over, and then a Boise State team where it'd probably be even longer than that. So it's one of those situations where, first of all, you knock out the idea that the 5 seed is better than the 1 seed, which I don't necessarily fully buy into, but I understand where people are coming from with that. You would get rid of that, first of all. You would also incentivize these teams to play really hard and try to fight for their conference, even in the smaller conferences. You try to fight for that ACC title. You try to fight to play really well, because frankly, if Miami didn't lose last weekend and they went on to win the ACC championship, they would have a very real path to the top 4 seed, to a top 4 placement. But it should just be the best 4 teams. It should just be whatever the committee decides is the best 4 teams in the country should get the bye. If we're trying to incentivize teams to play throughout the year and to play every game harder and to play every game very aggressively, this is probably the way to do it. You know, you have a couple of teams that are not necessarily in line for a bye by any means. They're probably not playing quite as hard. And Notre Dame's a team where I understand this system is plenty fine for Notre Dame. I'm not necessarily arguing for Notre Dame in this scenario. But the reality is, the highest they can go is number 5. The highest they can ever be is number 5. If they're the number 1 team in the country, I think they should get treated like the number 1 team in the country. I do think they should join a conference, which is a totally different conversation. But as of right now, I just don't see why this doesn't happen. I get that you want to keep the Big 10 or Big 12 and ACC involved. I totally understand that. But as of right now, we are having the wrong teams get those buys. We are using these buys in the wrong way, and we're incentivizing teams to not want to get them, which is not the way that this should go, not the way that you want it to go. So get rid of the auto buy system. Let these teams fight it out. Let the 4 best teams get those buys, and then that 5 seed will not be quite as coveted as it is right now, and people won't be arguing, is it better to get the 5 instead of the 1? That's absolutely ridiculous, and it's a real argument to be had right about now with this auto buy system we have. And then we got this one. The SEC and the Big Ten breakoff is relatively imminent if we avoid one, or if we don't get this one thing. So let's break it down really quickly. This is something I'm very worried about. I think a lot of people around the sport are very worried about it, to get this AFC, NFC type format between the SEC and the Big Ten. It is a very real thing. I'm sure they've talked about it behind closed doors. I'm almost certain they've talked about it behind closed doors. I don't know how readily they are to do that, but let's just say, Tennessee being left out, I don't know if that would be enough. I know it would make Greg Sankey very mad. Keeping Indiana out, I don't know if it would be enough. I know for a fact it would make Tony Petitti very mad. So you'd be in a very weird spot where maybe you'll have a fight on your hands. If Tennessee is left out for a 1-loss Indiana, or Indiana's left out for a 2-loss Tennessee, could it be the Big Ten and the SEC going at each other, or could they come together and say, I'm very mad about this situation, you want more power in this situation, so let's go take our ball, let's go play elsewhere and handle this ourselves. I think that's a real reality that we could be staring down in a couple of weeks. Now, one area that I absolutely promise you that this will happen, I'm not sure it'll happen in the Tennessee case, I'm not sure it'll happen in the Indiana case. I promise you, if Bama or Texas loses the SEC championship and falls out, I promise you, they will have a fight on their hands. I promise you, the SEC and the Big Ten will immediately get together. They will immediately start to write together a little bit of agreement, and they will probably have a postseason set up by the end of February, if I had to imagine. Because if you're going to drop out people for playing in those conference titles, you're doing the wrong thing, just plain and simple. So I hate to say it. So all of this stuff is around us right now. All of this stuff feels like a cloud over our head, and it's just waiting to pour on us. I do think there is still a little bit of sunlight. I do think there is still a little bit of an opening here, and it comes at the expense of Notre Dame. And I hate to say it, but Irish fans, I apologize, but here it is. If Notre Dame were to lose to USC at the end of the year, a lot of these scenarios would be sidestepped. For now. It would be sidestepped for this year. As of right now, I apologize to Irish fans, but them losing would solve a lot of problems. If they were to lose, I think Indiana, I think Tennessee would get in. I think the SEC and the Big Ten would not have a ton of gripes to be had, unless a couple of the teams fell out on the conference championship week or something like that. Other than that, they wouldn't have too much to get mad about other than the auto buys, which we already talked about. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. It might be unfair that all of this stuff is happening around them. It might be unfair that we might need Notre Dame to lose for the future of college football, but we might just need Notre Dame to lose for the future of college football. As crazy as that sounds, that might open a door where the Big Ten and the SEC aren't stamping their feet at the end of the day. And then the next college football playoff format will seem unfair and will look unfair and probably will be unfair, but it will also make more sense. It will also be more correct, and I'll fight this pretty much tooth and nail with just about anyone that will do it with me. But 4 SEC teams and 4 Big Ten teams are likely to get in. 8 out of the 12 teams are likely to be from those 2 conferences. These teams are not going to miss out. Let's just be totally honest. Whether you give them the auto bids, whether you don't give them the auto bids, they are going to find a way into that thing because those are the 2 best conferences. Much respect to the Big 12 and the ACC. I think they play much better football than a lot of people around the country give them credit for. They are not playing the same level of football that the SEC and the Big Ten are playing. They just aren't. So it's one of those situations where in the next iteration of this, I think it's going to be 14 teams. I think 3 bids are going to go for the SEC and the Big Ten, and that's just going to be the way it is. I really do think that's probably the way we're going if the SEC and the Big Ten don't break off and make their own thing, which we can talk about in time. But at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be 3 auto bids for each of them. I think they're going to fill up those auto bids and more. I don't think we're going to have to shove SEC teams or shove Big Ten teams into those auto bids where they don't belong. That's pretty much the baseline here. Obviously, I don't necessarily love the idea of giving a ton of auto bids to certain conferences or pushing all the weight behind these 2 conferences. But I will say, regardless of if you do it or not with this format, they're going to find a way in. So give them 3 auto bids. Give them 4 auto bids in a 16 playoff format. They're going to find a way in. They're going to get those 4 auto bids in. We're not going to really argue that those are 4 teams that deserve to be in the field. So it's going to be really interesting. Frankly, I'd love to reimagine the playoff, go backwards a little bit, and reimagine what this thing should be to make it fair, equitable, to make it fun. But at the end of the day, you have it in the hands of the SEC and the Big Ten, and we're probably just going to have to hope that they make the right decision. We're probably just going to have to hope that they keep a lot of these people in the fight, and they don't necessarily have the motivation that I would like them to have to keep them in the fight. So it's going to be interesting to watch, no doubt about that. It's a little bit unfair. It's a little bit biased. I'm not arguing that. I also don't think it would necessarily be wrong to give them a couple more auto bids to lean a little bit more in their direction, because regardless of if you lean or not, they're going to find a way into that thing. They're going to dominate that thing, and they're probably going to win a lot of the national titles as they have the past 20 years. They've absolutely dominated the sport of college football, and that's probably not changing anytime soon. As upsetting as that is for ACC and Big 12 fans, the SEC and the Big 10 are just playing a different game as of right this second. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of this stuff unfold. Obviously, all of this stuff is a little bit more 2025, 26 type problems, but definitely something to watch in the next couple of years. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow to wrap up this Week 13 slate.